Hey everybody, Eric Dorward here at the Spartan Rocketry Club, and I'm continuing my rebuild, if you want to call it that, of the Estes Sentinel rocket from some distant point in the past. It is time to start the finishing process on this, so I've broken out my wood fill here. I don't know, maybe about a tablespoon or so, and the tracest bit of water to loosen it up, and I've turned it into, I'm pretty pleased with the consistency here. It's pretty close to paint at this point. Your average kind of like temper or something like that. So that's all integrated, and all I'm really going to be doing here is I'm going to stir it up a little bit more, I think. I'm just going to paint this on pretty much all the exposed wood surfaces. This is maybe a little thinner than sometimes I've made it. I'm always just kind of eyeballing this, honestly. So, what I end up getting tends to vary from build to build, but this is basically the viscosity that I want. I want it basically to feel like brushing paint on. Now the point of this is I'm going to use this to fill in the grain of the balsa. Because I would like it to be a nice smooth finish, and balsa is notoriously grainy. So yeah, that is the whole point. So this stuff, I'm going to brush it on, and it dries pretty quickly, like half an hour tops, and then I'll sand it off, and that should take care of a good amount of the grooves in the wood. I'm taking care, I'm doing my best anyway, to keep this as smooth as possible. And anytime I'm going over the side, then I'm trying to clean that up. It's something that I don't want to leave in just a mess. I'm also trying to put some of this stuff on one face of the rocket, or the fin rather, and then flip it over and do the next one as quickly as possible. We have had some minor warping issues with this particular bit of balsa, so anytime you get wood wet, there is a potential for it to warp. So if you're doing one side of the fin then immediately doing the other, hopefully the one side kind of cancels the other out and you don't end up warping it strongly in one direction over the other. Alright, so I want this to smooth out. It's obviously, it doesn't need to be that smooth because I'm going to sand it, but especially like on the surfaces that I've sanded, that I've rounded, I don't want to leave any like obvious gloppy bits because that would undo all the work that I've done. There's also no harm in getting this on the body tube itself. In fact, I suspect I might be purposefully putting some on here as part of the production. We'll get to that when we get to that. So if you do end up getting it on the body tube, you can sand that right off. But the smoother it is, the less you get on it, the better. So there's a decent amount of wood on this. I probably made a bit more of this than I actually need, but there's no real harm in that. I've certainly cooked up batches that are too small and then had to make more. If you make too much, well, you could just pour this stuff back into the container, because over time, the fill in the container starts to dry out, and you would need to rehydrate it anyway. So there's not really any drawback to slightly rehydrating it before it completely dries out. But yeah, trying not to leave excess amounts on those rounded edges of the fins that you already sanded. That would be kind of my main caveat here. That would be annoying. And it does happen. I mean, you're going to get some, it's going to be somewhat inconsistent, but just running the brush over the edge of it like that does tend to get most of it. You're going to have to reshape it a little bit, but hopefully it's kind of minimal. Okay, so the main fins are just about done here. The front ones, they, honestly, I mean, they have less surface area, but by a whole lot. They're also, I didn't round them, so they're actually going to need probably more attention than these fins at the back. And I am putting a little bit of excess fill here in the back, partially because I got some on there already and I want it to be somewhat uniform, but also because this stuff is a decent way as well to approach the spiral in the tube if there is a noticeable one. This tube is, let's say it's somewhat inconsistent. There's some spots where it has a pretty noticeable spiral, and there are fairly long segments of it that don't have a noticeable spiral. So that, I think, I'm going to end up doing it kind of piecemeal. I'm not going to try to paint over the whole tube. I wouldn't do that anyway in all likelihood, but I'm only going to try to apply this where the tube spiral is like noticeable right now. Now if you are, let's just say, better at this part than I am, or you are more concerned about your finished product, then maybe you want to just fill in the entire tube just on general principle. That is certainly not a bad decision. You probably end up with better looking end product, but that is certainly your decision. Your rocket, your decision. I personally find the whole process of finishing the rocket to be kind of interminable. I'm always pleased when the last coat of paint goes on and it looks decent, and then I can move on to something that I prefer doing more and that takes less time, because this whole process of finishing, well, it is a lengthy ordeal. If you're going to put in the time to get it to look good, well, it's going to be well in excess of a week of mostly the rocket just sitting there and you waiting patiently, which I find to be, test my patience, I guess. I am taking the time here to make sure that I've got some of this fill on the edges. Now, I think there's a decent chance that I'm going to maybe not round them entirely, but put some effort into them after they're attached here, because they could look better. I'll just put it that way. Two down, two to go. Some of these actually, it looks like I could use a stronger fillet in a couple places too. I'm surprised by that because I did put decent, what I thought were decent fillets on this. That you can do pretty much, I wouldn't want to do it after the spray paint primer is on, but you do have some options in when you would want to put the fillets on in the finishing process. I would want to do it earlier rather than later, but the fact that if they need more, I'm not doing myself a disservice by doing that now rather than back before I started to put the sanding sealer, or wood fill and sanding sealer on. So I'm getting to the point where there are some blobs of wood fill that didn't quite mix up properly that I'm starting to apply. It is annoying. It's something that I would prefer not to happen, but ultimately it's not that big a deal because you're going to sand this. And while you can, I mean, you can just brush them off entirely if you wanted to, but if they end up getting, if you leave them on, and it's not my goal to leave them on, but if you do leave them on by accident or design, they'll sand off. You might have to put a little bit more effort into sanding it to get rid of them, but they definitely do sand off. That's good. Alright, this is the last face. I've still got a decent amount, not a lot, but a decent amount of wood fill left at my disposal, so I think I'm going to, as mentioned, try to fill spiral on the tube in any place that looks particularly obvious that it would need it. Just make sure all my fins are as done as they need to be before I start working on that. Okay. Alright, good enough. Do be somewhat careful about your launch lugs. You got to be able to sand the wood fill off. So if you're going to put it on, the launch lug could make that somewhat difficult. So just be a little careful about that. Alright, so honestly, I mean, the spiral's not that bad. There were a couple spots I could see in between in here that when I brushed over them, I could see where the wood fill was going. Because it does, when you brush it into the spiral groove, it does kind of look, you know, like extra white, like it's filling in a line. So there are a couple spots in here that seem to need it. But the back part, the section in between the two fins, you know, I guess that's noticeable here a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to go light on this stuff. I'm going to kind of apply it, just dab it on first. And I'm just following the spiral here for the time being. Alright, that's good enough. And then I'm going to brush it out so that, you know, the big old dab marks get evened out. You could just paint over the whole thing. Now, that would not be the world's worst idea. When you do this, of course, too, you definitely need to sand. Do not just leave the wood fill stripes, because that will not look good. It will look probably worse than whatever, you know, whatever the spiral looked like before you tried to fix it. So don't do that. Alright, there are a couple other spots here that I see that are somewhat noticeable in the middle. So there are, sometimes it feels like there's a main spiral in these and there's a lesser spiral and one of them's worse than the other. That, you know, if that's the case, you don't have to paint both spirals if you don't think they both need it. Honestly, at this point I've pretty much painted the entire middle section here with the foot fill, so it kind of feels like I should just paint the whole thing in at this point. But sticking with my plan. Alright, so yeah, this part definitely is going to have to get sanded. It's going to have to be sanded somewhat vigorously. That's fine, not a problem. The front bit, though, you know, I can see if I really go looking for where the spiral is, but it's not bad. It's really not bad at all. This part is a little bit, because I think the tube got a little bit smushed here at some point. So just dab that. Probably the secondary spiral here could probably stand it as well. Yeah. After about like this point, it looks pretty good. It's hard to tell. Ultimately, I'm probably not saving myself a whole lot of time by only filling in the spiral. If I ended up just painting the whole thing, probably would take about the same amount of time to do and to sand. But I'm alright with the process. Okay, so that's about it, I think, that I really want to waste my time. It's not wasting, but I want to spend my time filling in the spiral. So this needs to dry. The fact that I've painted the fins means you have to figure out how you're going to stand this. I think I'm just going to stand it up, honestly. That's probably the best. It's just sitting on the 4 wingtips right at the end. That'll be okay. The wood fill, it's just a soap and water cleanup, so that shouldn't be a problem. The next thing is that I need to sand it down and put some sanding sealer on it. Hopefully, I only need to do this once, but I suspect I will need to do it more than once to get everything smooth enough, especially the fins, maybe the tube. So we'll see what the next video happens to be. It'll be some other part of the finishing process, but until then, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.